So we had a friend of a friend of a friend over the house, and she looked at me and she goes, "Do you work?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I work, right? I'm a project manager for so-and-so company. I work full time." Hey guys, and welcome back to Mini Urban Farm. I'm Veronica, and I consider myself to be an urban homesteader. Now, what does that mean exactly? Basically, for me, it means that I try to raise all my own food and try to raise animals for food as well, for eggs, for meat, that sort of thing. But we try to live as sustainably as possible to reduce costs, to be healthier, to give back to the earth, all of that stuff. So one of the main things that I actually wanted to talk to you guys about is homesteading with a full-time job. Is it possible? Can it be done? And the answer is yes, right? I am an urban homesteader. I have a full-time job. I am a project manager for a company that is not my company. I also blog part-time on miniurbanfarm.com, and I do YouTube as well on the side. I homestead full-time though, right? Like, homesteading is not really a thing that you do for an hour or two a week. It's something that is like a lifestyle. It's not really a hobby. So today I'm going to break down for you exactly how long it takes me to homestead with a full-time job and how I'm able to do that. But first, I did want to share with you a really funny story. At least I think it's funny because it was something that took me by surprise. So we had a friend of a friend of a friend over the house. I don't know if we're having a get-together or something, but there were a lot of people in the house. And somebody who really didn't know us, right? They didn't know me, they didn't know Alan, and they didn't really know that we garden and raise chickens and all the other stuff. So I had an incubator going in the kitchen, and it just so happened that day there were chicks hatching out. Now, they saw the chicks in the kitchen, and they, I think, live somewhere in the community as well. So not too far away from where we live, and it's definitely not a rural area, right? We live in an HOA subdivision community. So that was something that they didn't expect to see in the kitchen, is chicks being hatched. And then we were outside also, and they saw the garden, and she was, looking at all the plants and the big garden that I have for this area, right? It's a big garden. It's a small garden, I think, in general, but 450 square feet is probably a lot more than people in this area have dedicated to growing food. So then she starts looking around and starts looking at all of the crops growing and the colors of all the different, vegetables growing. And she looked at me and she goes, "Do you work?" And I said, "Yeah, of course I work, right? I'm a project manager for so-and-so company. I work full time." And then she looked at me and she was like, "How do you do all this stuff then if you work? Like, when do you have time to do this garden, and when do you have time to do all the animals and the chickens and all that stuff?" And so that got me thinking. I mean, I thought that it works pretty well, right? Like, I do it on my free time, and it's a lifestyle that we've dedicated ourselves to, and a lifestyle that we've chosen for ourselves. But a lot of people, I feel, maybe don't know that you can homestead even if you have a full-time job. So when I say homesteading, what exactly do we have on our homestead, right? We live in a very urban environment. Technically it's the suburbs, but we live in the suburbs, and there's not really a lot of space to have open fields of cows and stuff like that. So if you can see behind me here, we have the garden, right? This is where I grow all of the herbs and all of the vegetables that my family eats throughout the seasons. That produces pretty much all of our non-meat food. So the garden is the first one, and basically the gateway drug, I guess, if you want to call it. Most people start gardening and then start getting into homesteading. Chickens is another one which we have on our homestead. So we had started off with about 3 chickens. We had gone into Tractor Supply one day and there were baby chicks, and we just kind of got them on a whim. So we actually started out with chickens as well after the garden. Now, I've been gardening for 10 or 15 years at least. So that was really not, my gateway. I was just gardening, but then we ended up getting chickens. So we had started with 3 chickens, and then that really is a gateway to even more chickens. So then we got another 7 chickens, and before we knew it, we had 40 chickens. So it's really easy to go from just one animal to then a whole bunch of different types of animals. So we have chickens. We have now chickens for eggs and chickens for meat, and then we're also going to get quail and turkey at some point in time as well. Now, another thing that goes into the homestead is cooking from scratch, right? I actually came into the kitchen because the guy next door decided today is the perfect time right now to power wash the back of his patio. We live in suburbia, so that's really not to be avoided. So I came into the kitchen, but it's the perfect place to talk about the fact that we cook all of our own meals. We do obviously go out and, get takeout every once in a while and stuff. We're not perfect human beings, but we enjoy cooking. I enjoy cooking specifically. And when I say cooking, I mean cooking from scratch, right? I try my absolute best not to buy any store-made, prepackaged items, like for example, if you're getting a little thing of bruschetta, like a tub of, tomato pieces with, different ingredients in them to put on top of bread, for instance. Instead of going to the store and getting one that's prepackaged, I used what's outside in the garden. I cut it up, and every single time that I want to feed my family that thing, I make it from scratch. The same thing goes for making bread and making pasta dough. We make all those from scratch here in the kitchen, just so that we don't have to buy those type of things, which are, in my opinion, really overpriced and not the best health-wise for you to begin with. So cooking does take up a lot of time. It's just another thing that we have decided is really important for our family. And the last part of our homestead, the last major aspect, which takes up a lot of our time, is building out our food forest. So we recently bought a piece of property. I say recently, it was probably close to a year ago now actually, but we bought a piece of property, and eventually we will be building our dream house there and moving and all of that good stuff. But for right now, it basically is just a home to our chickens, and it has a dedicated space that we have allocated, set to the side for a food forest. Now, in addition to the garden, which I'm always gonna have my garden, I absolutely love having my annual raised, bed garden or whatever type of garden it is, growing annual crops. I want, and one of our main goals is to have a food forest, which is basically, if you're not familiar with it, a series of food trees, so like oranges and lemon trees and fig trees and just a whole bunch of fruit and nut trees, which are the canopy, sub-canopy layers, and then you have bushes like blackberries and blueberries and things of that sort. And then you also have root crops, so you can grow sweet potatoes and carrots and other things like that. And in the middle, all of it, kind of like protecting everything, is the ground cover. You can also have some vining things, but the main purpose of it is to grow food, right? So it is a food forest. Now that's something that is like a really heavy permaculture idea, which we are just starting to dabble in. But one of our goals this year, at the beginning of the year, was to buy each month one fruit or nut tree. And so we actually have been keeping on track with that goal. I think we're at 6 fruit trees now. This month we bought a mango tree, and we even started to plant all of those out in the food forest. So that was something that definitely has been taking up a lot of time. We spend a lot of time out there on weekends, making sure that everything is cleared and that there's nothing like, killing off the plants and that kind of thing. So I am going to break it down for you, right? I actually made some notes and I calculated out exactly how much time I spend on each one of these things. Now, there's a lot more that goes into homesteading, right? If you're fixing things yourself and that kind of thing, they do take up a lot of time. But for me, those are the main ones: gardening, cooking, food forest, and taking care of our chickens. Eventually we'll have other types of animals, which will probably add to the time, not by much because it'll be all in the same area, but for the most part, right now we're just talking about chickens. So I estimated that on average, gardening takes me about 3 hours to 4 hours per week. Now, that's not that bad, right? A lot of people think that if you're raising food for yourself, right, and not just like 1 or 2 tomatoes, we're talking about like enough tomatoes to make your own pasta sauce for the entire year type of tomatoes, right, times everything else in the kitchen. 3 hours is not that much, right? If you can dedicate 3 hours to growing a garden, you are well on your way to homesteading. 3 hours per week, I mean, I know tons of people who spend way more time than 3 hours binge watching on Netflix. So definitely 3 hours for me seems like a very good investment to be able to raise all my own vegetables and to be able to even preserve tons of vegetables in the freezer and not have to buy food from the store as far as vegetables and herbs go. Those 3 hours are basically made up of the fact that every morning I walk the garden, I check on everything, I spend a little bit of time doing some pest control and making sure that everything is watered properly, and then harvesting, either daily or weekly or however, many intervals in between I have enough crops to harvest. I take time to harvest everything and just to make sure that the garden is okay. Now, on a weekly basis, I do set aside, I think it's like an hour, hour and a half, sometimes it varies, on the weekend, just to make sure that everything is like up to up to par in the garden. Everything is organized and all that. But on a weekly average basis, I take about 3 hours ish, depending on the beginning of the season, the end of the season, that kind of thing, to garden. So 3 hours on average. Now, along the same lines of food production, the food forest currently is taking us about 2 to 4 hours per week, and that is generally after work or on weekends. So, right, we're at work 9 to 5. I have a full-time job outside of mini urban farm, so I don't do anything with the food forest during that time. So it's either after work or on weekends, usually on weekends when we can dedicate like a bulk amount of time to raising the food forest, which have been historically up till now things like clearing the land, buying fruit trees, planting out the fruit trees, making sure the chickens don't eat the fruit trees, just setting up the initial base system. One day when the food forest is completely established and you're just in there, the only thing that will have to be done on a regular basis is harvesting, because theoretically in a food forest, it works pretty much like a little miniature ecosystem in and of itself, and the canopy trees will provide mulch and shade, and the lower level trees and shrubs and root crops and all that will provide nitrogen fixing properties for the soil. So it will pretty much take care of itself, and you won't have to water it, and you won't have to do a lot of the other things that you have to do in a garden. So for right now, mainly the amount of time that we're spending on the food forest is for preparing the land and actually getting the food forest set up. Next up is our animals, which right now is just the chickens. We have meat chickens and we have egg chickens, right? So we kind of tend to separate them because they are different breeds. I'm going to be trying to combine them and thin out the flock a little bit in the upcoming months, but for right now we do have separate types of chickens for egg production and meat production. Now, I incubate all of our eggs here. Actually, I have a set of eggs going right there. That is our, right there, that's our incubator. The thing with incubating eggs is that it doesn't really take up that much time. I think I check it maybe like once or twice a day, but it's on an automatic egg turner, so you don't have to do anything for it. The only thing I check it for is the humidity level to make sure it has like a little thermostat type thing on the inside of it. So I want to make sure that that is not like dipping too low. And it takes me literally 2 minutes, 3 minutes a day to check that. And if you need to, just take the little syringe thing and inject more water into it. Aside from that, because we don't have eggs going all the time, aside from that is feeding the chickens and making sure that they are not sick and that they're all in their coop at night and that kind of thing. Now, we don't live on that property where the chickens live, so we actually have to drive to that property. It is about, I want to say 5 or 10 minutes by car here, and depending on traffic, but they actually ended up closing the road a few months ago that leads directly from this community over to that community. So instead of a straight shot like this, we have had to go from our home here out around the entire city and then over here, and then the same thing back. So the commute has actually taken a lot of time. When we live on that property one day, we won't have a commute. We'll just have to go outside to the chicken coop. But for right now, that commute is incorporated into this time, and we spent about 4 hours per week taking care of the animals. Now, that includes checking the water and checking the food, also going to the feed store and buying their feed, right? And we try to incorporate that into other tasks. So if we are out doing groceries, we, swing by the feed store at the same time and pick that up. But the good thing about our chickens is that we have actually set in place systems that we do minimal work with the chickens, right? We have currently, I think it's like 35-ish chickens. We've had some problems with them kind of fighting each other lately, and we lost a few. But for the amount of chickens that we have, that is not a lot of work, especially considering it's mostly the commute time at this point. We have systems in place for their food and their water. So we have a rain collection barrel. So the chicken coop actually has a gutter on it, which funnels into the rain barrel, and it just, is funneled into their own little watering system with the poultry nipples, which is gravity fed. So it's not like we have to refill their water on a daily basis, which was really important to me because I do not want to be out there trudging water back and forth. We do not have a well on the property. Our neighbor over there, which is another 2 acres down, it has been really kind and allowed us to use that water before we had the rainwater system. So getting the rain barrel system was really essential in making sure that our chickens have water and not having to do anything for them. We also use that same rain barrel with the spigot on it to fill our other chicken waters. So we really don't have to do anything for that. We have 2 giant waters for the meat chickens, and we just refill it right there next to where the other chicken coop is. And the same thing applies to our chicken feeder. So I got really tired of using the tiny little chicken feeders that really don't hold a lot of chicken food, and they get all clogged up and stuff. And then you have to like clean them out nonstop because the chickens just make a mess out of it. So we came up with a way to make a giant 185-pound holding chicken feeder for our chickens. We basically used a giant trash barrel as well as these little chicken feeder things that you can buy off Amazon. They're like super inexpensive for the set of them. I think it was like $20 total. And so we just created this giant chicken feeder. I will link the video somewhere here if you want to go watch it. We did an entire video on how to build it yourself if you're interested in that, but we don't really fill that feeder on a regular basis. The last time I filled it was probably a month ago, and they still have food in there. So I think it holds anywhere between 3 and 4 bags. I think it's like 3.5 bags. So once a month or one, whatever it is, we go to the feed store when we're doing other errands, we pick up their food and dump it in there, and then they are set for like the next month. Now, I don't know that many people that have that many chickens that don't have to worry about their food. The same thing applies for the other chickens that we have, the meat chickens. We have built out a little bit larger feeders that still fit in their coop, so we don't have to be refilling their food on a daily basis. All right, so next up is the amount of time it takes me to cook from scratch. When I say cook from scratch, I mean making breakfast, lunch, dinner, snacks, making pasta dough, making homemade bread, that sort of thing, right? So it takes me approximately 12 hours a week to do all the cooking. Now, in this home, I am responsible for all the cooking, mainly because if I left it up to Mr. Mini Urban Farm, we wouldn't be able to eat. But I also really do enjoy the cooking, so that's not a problem for me. When I calculated it out, doing breakfast, lunch, and dinner, it's about 12 hours. Now, I do a lot of bulk meal prep as well for lunches, like larger pots of beans and chicken prep on the grill and that kind of thing. But overall, 12 hours I don't think is a lot to prepare all of the meals for the entire week. So if you add all of that up, it ends up being about 20-ish hours, depending on the week and what's going on, with the rest of life. But I don't think that's a lot of time to do all of those things, especially if you are being that sustainable. Now, we do both work 9-to-5 jobs, so right now we're working from home, but usually we're out of the house and we don't have that time to do any of this stuff. So at the end of the day, when do you homestead with a full-time job? Well, it comes down to mornings, nights, and weekends. So prior to work from home, I would be getting up in the morning and going to check on the garden, and then right before I went to sleep, I would walk the garden again, just to make sure everything was in place, and those both took me about 5 minutes each to complete any garden tasks that needed to get done, and then I would place an hour on the weekends, one day of the weekend, probably Saturday mornings, to do whatever other garden chores needed to get done. Now, the food forest is something like a hobby for right now. It's going to be food producing one day, but for right now it's been like a little passion project that we have, so we enjoy going out there and doing it instead of going to the movies or going to the mall and spending money, other things like that. If you're homesteading and these are some of your goals that you're gonna have to sacrifice other things, unfortunately, which we are more than happy to do because we really do enjoy this lifestyle. So that is when we would do the food forest, and then after work we would go and take care of the animals. We are actually out on the land about every other day because we have been able to put in place these systems to not have to water and feed the chickens. The egg collection seems to be completely fine if it's every other day, and when I'm not able to go or if I'm really worried about it, one of our neighbors has been kind enough to go and gather the eggs, and then he can just keep them because he's doing us a favor. So then cooking is really the bulk of what's left, and those 12 hours, if you space it out throughout the week, it's really not that bad. 12 hours divided by 7 days a week is an hour something every single day, which is not too bad. I've gotten really good at making meals really quickly. Sometimes I spend a lot more time than that doing dinner if we're having people over, or if we're having like a romantic dinner at home or something like that, because I really do enjoy it. I don't know too many homesteaders that don't enjoy cooking, or at least they deal with it and they cook even basic meals. So that's one of my things that I enjoy doing, one of my hobbies. So for me, it's not work to have to cook 12 hours a week. So I did also want to leave you with some tips to help you homestead with a full-time job, right? Not everybody has as much time as I do to dedicate on weekends or after hours or whatever. Now, these are just some tips that I have found that really work for me and my family, and hopefully you'll be able to incorporate them as well. The biggest one is to get the kids involved. Now, I do not have children, but Alan has children and they are with us part-time, and we have made it a point to involve them in everything that we do, from the chickens to the cooking, and everything in between. Both of the kids really enjoy helping to cook meals, breakfast, lunch, and dinner whenever they're here. So that is something that I allow them to help with, and it's something that they enjoy doing. So that works out pretty well. And then the same thing for the chickens. You know, they enjoy having chickens. I don't know of too many kids who don't like having 40 pets, and so they go out there, and we have taught them how to check the water and check the food and make sure that the chickens aren't sick and that kind of thing, you know, and just get them involved and allow them to do some of these things. That way it's not like a burden that the kids are around. The next tip I can give you that ridiculously reduces the amount of time that you have to spend on these homesteading tasks is to put systems in place. And I have tried to put systems in place for every aspect of our homesteading life, from the chickens with the giant feeders and the automated rain barrel watering system, but also the same thing in the garden. I used to spend hours manually watering the garden every week, but since I installed a drip irrigation system, I no longer have to do that. I still go out there and check the watering and make sure that everything is not being drastically overwatered or underwatered, and I do adjust as needed, especially when it's raining. For the most part, the plants are getting watered on demand. Like, I don't touch it. It's very rare that, you know, it needs to be adjusted daily. So far, nothing's broken in there. If it ever breaks, then that's something that will need to be repaired. So that will take, you know, probably half an hour to an hour, depending on what it is. But it's just really incorporated into my daily garden walk to check for all these things anyway, so I don't spend extra time on this particular task, which really reduces the amount of hours that it takes me to homestead. Now, one of the other systems I have in place is to bulk cook meals, right? So I do bulk lunches. I will do large pots of beans. I come from a Spanish family, and so does Alan, so we are accustomed to eating a lot of Spanish type beans. I also do a lot of chicken on the grill in batches. I also bulk produce our pasta dough. So I make the pasta dough and then you can freeze it, and then I roll it out probably once a week or so and use it as needed, but we usually have a very large supply of pasta on hand because I'm always preparing pasta dough in bulk. The same thing is true for our tomato sauce. These things that take up a lot of time to do, like tomato sauce, right? It doesn't take 10 minutes to make tomato sauce from scratch. So I have gotten accustomed to, whenever I have a whole bulk of tomatoes, as I do sitting on my kitchen counter right now, I will take all of those tomatoes and make a giant batch of tomato sauce, and I will freeze it, put it in the freezer so that next time when I am going to cook and I want to use it, I can just grab it and incorporate it into whatever meal we're making. At the end of the day, homesteading is a lifestyle choice. It's going to be really difficult to convince yourself and the family and everybody else in your life to get on board with homesteading if you don't enjoy raising animals, if you don't enjoy gardening, if you don't enjoy cooking, preserving food, and all of that stuff. So at the end of the day, if you are interested in homesteading, you know, these hours, those 20-something hours per week, it doesn't feel like I am doing a chore for 20-something hours. It feels like this is our life and we love the life that we've chosen. Hopefully the same is true for you and you don't notice how long it takes to do these things. And if you haven't started doing any of these things, then hopefully this is just like a light at the end of the tunnel, that it really doesn't feel like you're spending 20-something hours homesteading, and that you really are able to homestead with a full-time job and in an urban environment. So thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. I will be making definitely more urban homesteading videos in the upcoming future, so I will see you in the next one. Bye.